The words came out of Stephanie's mouth like poison. Thomas, you're no longer welcome here unannounced. My parents find your presence disruptive to their peace. She stood in the doorway of the house I'd bought for them, her manicured hand gripping the frame like she owned every brick. Behind her, I could see the granite countertops, the hardwood floors, the crown molding that my $43,000 had made possible. Patrick wouldn't even look at me, just stared at his expensive shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. I didn't say a word, but something inside me shifted into place like the mechanical click of a ladder lock. I walked to my truck, climbed behind the wheel, and drove to the law office downtown where I'd scheduled an appointment for exactly this moment. But let me start where this really began, because the best lessons about family come when people show you exactly who they've been all along. The autumn air carried the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves as I pulled into Patrick and Stephanie's driveway. My disability settlement check had cleared 3 days ago, and I'd spent the morning at the bank converting my entire nest egg into a cashier's check. $43,000. Every penny I had left after 32 years of running into burning buildings while other people ran out. Diane sat beside me in the passenger seat, fidgeting with her purse strap. Are you sure about this, Tommy? It's everything we have. I squeezed her hand. Their family, Dee. Patrick's our only son. This house will give them stability, give the kids a good neighborhood. Besides, Stephanie's warming up to us. You saw how she hugged you at Thanksgiving. Diane smiled, but I caught the doubt in her eyes. She'd never said it outright, but I knew she saw the way Stephanie looked at us sometimes, like we were something she'd stepped in at a construction site. But family was family, and this gesture would prove that the McKennas took care of their own. Patrick opened the front door before we'd even knocked, his face bright with excitement. Dad, Mom, come in, come in. Stephanie's making coffee. The living room smelled like vanilla candles and fresh paint. Stephanie emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray with actual matching china cups, not the mismatched mugs we drank from at home. She'd pulled her blonde hair back in some complicated style that probably took an hour to achieve. Thomas, Diane. So good to see you. Her smile looked practiced, perfect. Please sit. I made those almond cookies you liked. Patrick settled into the leather armchair I'd helped him pick out at the furniture store. We have news about the house. Good news, I hope, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. Because I have something for you too. Stephanie perched on the edge of the sofa, her spine straight as a ruler. Actually, that's what we wanted to talk about. We've been discussing the down payment situation with my parents. Your parents? Diane's voice carried a note of surprise. They're very experienced with real estate, Patrick explained. Dad's handled dozens of property transactions through his law practice. They offered to co-sign on the mortgage to help us get better terms. I pulled out the cashier's check, the numbers bold and official across the blue paper. Well, that's great, son. But you won't need to worry about the down payment. This should cover it. The silence stretched like a held breath. Patrick's eyes widened as he read the amount. Stephanie's perfect composure flickered for just a moment. Oh my God, Dad. I can't take this. It's too much. It's not too much, I said firmly. It's what family does. Your mother and I, we don't need much. This disability money was meant for something important. And what's more important than giving my son and his family a proper home? Diane reached over and touched Patrick's arm. Your father insisted. He said he wanted to see you settled before we get too old to enjoy watching the grandkids grow up in their own house. Stephanie stood abruptly, the china cup rattling against its saucer. This is incredibly generous, Thomas. Really. But we need to discuss this with my parents first. They've already started the paperwork. What paperwork? I asked. I thought you were still looking at houses. Patrick and Stephanie exchanged a glance I couldn't quite read. We found the perfect place, he said. That colonial on Elm Street with the big backyard. Remember, I showed you the listing. I remembered. It was beautiful, way more house than I'd expected them to afford on Patrick's teacher salary and Stephanie's part-time marketing job. But $43,000 would make it possible. The thing is, Stephanie continued, my parents are putting up some money too, for renovations, furniture, that sort of thing. It would be simpler if we handled all the financial arrangements through them. Simpler how? Diane asked. Well, Dad's a lawyer. He knows how to structure these things for tax purposes. Make sure everything's legal and protected. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to value honesty and straightforwardness. Patrick, I just want to make sure my contribution is protected too. Maybe I should talk to this lawyer myself. That's not necessary, Stephanie said quickly. Really, Thomas, we're all family here. Your money will be safe. We'll make sure everything's documented properly. The coffee had grown cold in my cup, but I took a sip anyway, buying time to think. Something felt off, like smoke in a building where you couldn't see the fire yet. I'll tell you what, I said finally. Why don't I come with you when you meet with your father? Professional to professional. I may not be a lawyer, but I've learned a thing or two about contracts over the years. Stephanie's smile grew rigid. I don't think that's necessary. Dad prefers to work with people he knows well. He's very particular about his client relationships. Client relationships? Diane's voice sharpened. I thought we were talking about family. Of course we are. I just meant that he likes to keep business and family separate. Very organized that way. Patrick jumped in. Dad, just trust us on this. Stephanie's family has been incredibly generous. We want to do this right. I folded the check carefully and slipped it back into my pocket. Let me think about it. This is a big step. Of course, Stephanie said, but I caught relief in her voice. Take all the time you need. We stayed another hour, talking about the grandkids' school activities and Diane's part-time job at the grocery store. Normal family conversation, but underneath it all, I felt like I was missing something important. The drive home was quiet until Diane finally spoke. Something's not right, Tommy. Yeah, I agreed. But maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe this is just how rich people do business. Since when is Patrick rich people? I didn't have an answer for that. 3 weeks later, Patrick called with the news that they'd closed on the house. The excitement in his voice was infectious, and I found myself genuinely happy for them despite my lingering doubts. When he invited us over for a family dinner to celebrate, I brought the check again. This time, the conversation was different. Stephanie's father, Richard, was there. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit who shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. He spoke with the kind of polished accent that made every word sound like it had been rehearsed. Thomas, I understand you want to contribute to the children's success. Very admirable. Of course, we've already completed the purchase, but I'm sure we can find a way to incorporate your generosity into the arrangement. Incorporate how? I asked. Well, the house is currently titled to Patrick and Stephanie, with my wife and myself as co-owners for mortgage purposes. Your contribution could be treated as a gift to the family, which would be the cleanest approach from a tax perspective. A gift. The word stuck in my throat. For tax purposes, Richard repeated smoothly. Of course, morally, we all understand this is an investment in their future. Your investment. Stephanie leaned forward. Thomas, the important thing is that we're all helping Patrick and the kids have a beautiful home. Does it really matter whose name is on what piece of paper? I looked around the dining room table at these people who shared my son's life. Richard and his wife, Eleanor, sat like they owned everything they surveyed. Stephanie watched me with barely concealed impatience. And Patrick, my boy, looked everywhere except at me. Actually, yes, I said quietly. It does matter. This isn't grocery money we're talking about. This is my entire disability settlement. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thomas? Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from never being contradicted. I think you misunderstand how these arrangements work. Richard has structured this to protect everyone's interests. Protect everyone's interests except mine, apparently. That's not fair, Stephanie snapped. We're offering to take your money and put it toward the house. We're not required to do that. Required, I repeated. Stephanie, this is my son we're talking about. My family. And this is my house, she shot back. My name on the deed. My responsibility. The words hit like a punch to the chest. I looked at Patrick, waiting for him to say something, anything, to bridge the gap that had suddenly opened between us. "Dad," he said finally, "maybe you should think about this differently. Maybe this is about trust." Trust. The word echoed in the sudden silence. I thought about all the times I'd trusted Patrick to make good choices. All the times I'd trusted Stephanie to treat my family with respect. All the times I'd trusted that love was more important than legal documents. "You're right," I said, standing up from the table. "This is about trust." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the cashier's check one last time. For a moment, I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of every dollar, every hour I'd worked, every risk I'd taken to earn this money. Then I folded it carefully and put it back in my pocket. "I need to think about this some more," I announced. "Thank you for dinner." Diane followed me to the car without a word. We drove home in silence, but I could feel the questions radiating from her like heat. It wasn't until we were sitting in our own kitchen, surrounded by the familiar comfort of our modest home, that she finally spoke. "They're going to take your money and shut you out." "Yeah," I said. "I think they are. So what do we do?" I looked around our kitchen at the appliances that worked but weren't pretty, at the cabinets that needed refinishing, at the windows that let in cold air because I'd been saving money for Patrick's future instead of fixing my own house. We stopped pretending they're different than they are. The next morning, I called Richard's law office and made an appointment. Not as Patrick's father, not as a prospective client, but as a citizen who wanted to understand exactly what he was being asked to sign. Richard's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building that probably cost more per month than I made in a year. His secretary, a woman with steel-gray hair and the bearing of a drill sergeant, looked at me like I'd tracked mud across her clean floors. "Mr. McKenna, is it? Mr. Whitmore will see you now." Richard's office was all dark wood and leather, the kind of space designed to intimidate. He sat behind a desk the size of a small car, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a thick file. "Thomas, good to see you again. Please sit." I remained standing. "I want to understand exactly what you're proposing for my contribution to Patrick's house." Of course. Very prudent." He opened the file and pulled out several documents covered in dense legal text. "As I explained, the cleanest approach is to treat your contribution as a gift. No strings attached, no complications. Patrick and Stephanie get the benefit, you get the satisfaction of helping family. And I get no legal protection for my investment." Richard's smile never wavered. "Protection from what? These are your children we're talking about. Surely you trust them to do right by you." "I trusted them to include me in the decision-making process too." "How did that work out?" The smile flickered. "Thomas, I think you may be overcomplicating this. Family relationships shouldn't be governed by legal contracts. Says the man who's drawing up legal contracts to govern our family relationship." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of look a cat gives a mouse. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if my money is going into that house, my name goes on the deed as a partial owner. Same as you and your wife. That's not how we've structured this arrangement." "Then maybe we need to restructure it." Richard closed the file and removed his glasses. "Thomas, let me be frank with you. Patrick and Stephanie are young professionals with excellent prospects. They don't need the complications that come with multiple ownership arrangements. What they need is a clean, simple start." "And what do I need?" "You need to understand your place in this family structure." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I'd heard similar language before, usually from people who thought my Irish working-class background made me somehow less than them. "My place," I repeated. "Look, Thomas, you're a good man. Honest, hard-working, devoted to your family. But Patrick is moving into a different social circle now. Stephanie's family has connections, influence, resources. This isn't about excluding you. It's about positioning Patrick for success. Success that requires shutting out his father." Richard spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. "Not shutting out. Understanding boundaries. You can still be a grandfather, still be part of family holidays. But the decision-making, the financial planning, the social connections, those things require a certain level of sophistication. I thought about Patrick as a little boy, crying in my arms after nightmares, begging me to read him one more story before bedtime. I thought about teaching him to throw a baseball, to change a tire, to treat people with respect regardless of how much money they had. And you think I lack that sophistication? I think you lack the background to navigate these waters effectively. There's no shame in that. Not everyone needs to understand complex financial instruments or social protocols. But everyone needs to understand when they're being robbed. Richard's pleasant mask finally slipped. I beg your pardon? You heard me. You're taking my life savings and cutting me out of any protection or control. In my neighborhood, we call that robbery. Your neighborhood? Richard repeated, loading the words with contempt. Yes. I imagine they have colorful names for a lot of things in your neighborhood. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on his expensive desk. Let me tell you about my neighborhood, Richard. In my neighborhood, a man's word means something. In my neighborhood, when you take someone's money, you give them a seat at the table. In my neighborhood, we don't hide behind fancy words to justify screwing over family. This conversation is over. Richard stood up, his face flushed with anger. I suggest you reconsider your attitude before you damage your relationship with your son permanently. I suggest you reconsider your proposal before I explore other options. I walked out of that office knowing exactly where I stood. Not with Patrick and Stephanie, not with Richard and Eleanor, but with myself, and with the truth that had been staring me in the face for months. They thought I was too stupid to understand what they were doing. They were wrong about that. The meeting Richard hadn't expected me to have was with James Morrison, a lawyer I'd met through the firefighters union. Jim worked from a small office above a hardware store, and his idea of intimidating decor was a coffee maker that actually worked. Tommy, good to see you. How's retirement treating you? Could be better. I need some advice, Jim. Family law stuff. I laid out the whole situation while Jim took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back and whistled. Jesus, Tommy. They're really trying to pull a fast one on you. That's what I figured. What are my options? Well, first thing, don't give them that check until you have proper legal protection. If you want to invest in the house, you need to be on the deed as a proportional owner. $43,000 out of what total purchase price? $280,000. Jim did the math. So you're talking about 15% ownership. That should be reflected in the deed, and you should have a written agreement spelling out what happens if they sell, if someone wants to buy out someone else, all that stuff. And if they won't agree to that, then you keep your money and let them figure out their own finances. It sounded simple when Jim said it, but I knew it wasn't going to be simple at all. That evening, I called Patrick and asked him to come over. Alone. He arrived looking nervous, like a kid who'd been called to the principal's office. Dad, if this is about the house thing, I really think you're making it more complicated than it needs to be. Sit down, son. He perched on the edge of the sofa, still wearing his teacher clothes, looking younger than his 34 years. Patrick, I want you to tell me honestly, do you think it's fair that I put $43,000 into your house and get no legal protection for that investment? Dad, you'll always be welcome there. It's not like we're going to cut you out. That's not what I asked. I asked if you think it's fair. Patrick stared at his hands. Stephanie's family has been really generous. Her dad is handling all the legal stuff for free. He knows what he's doing. I'm sure he does. That's what worries me. What's that supposed to mean? It means he's protecting his family's interests, not mine. That's his job as Stephanie's father. But who's protecting my interests? Who's making sure I don't get screwed over? Dad, we would never. Patrick. I interrupted him gently. 6 months ago, Stephanie told me I wasn't educated enough to have an opinion about your vacation plans. 3 months ago, she suggested that Diane and I were too loud at your birthday party. Last week, she told me I needed to call before visiting my own son. Now she wants my life savings with no strings attached. Do you see a pattern here? Patrick's face flushed red. She's just particular about things. It doesn't mean anything. It means everything. And the fact that you can't see it breaks my heart. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the street, their voices carrying the kind of carefree joy that seemed impossible in my living room right now. "What do you want me to do?" Patrick asked finally. "I want you to be my son. I want you to stand up for your family when someone disrespects us. I want you to insist that if I'm putting money into your house, I get treated like an equal partner, not like some charity case you're humoring. And if I can't do that?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out the cashier's check. For the third time in 2 weeks, I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of all the years it represented. "Then you'll have to figure out how to buy that house without my help." Patrick stared at the check like it might burst into flames. "Dad, please. Stephanie will kill me if this falls through. Her parents have already put money down. The closing is next week. Then you better have a serious conversation with your wife about treating your father with respect." Patrick left that night without another word. I knew he'd go home and have a fight with Stephanie. I knew she'd blame me for complicating things. I knew Richard and Eleanor would paint me as some kind of unreasonable working-class thug who didn't understand how civilized people handled these matters. I was right about all of it. The phone call came 2 days later. Stephanie's voice was cold enough to freeze water. "Thomas, I think we need to have a conversation." "I'm listening." "Patrick told me about your demands. I have to say I'm disappointed. After everything my family has done to welcome you into this process, this feels like extortion." "Extortion?" The word hit like a slap. "You're holding our house hostage because your feelings got hurt. That's emotional manipulation, and I won't stand for it." "Stephanie, I'm asking to be treated fairly. That's not manipulation." "Fairly?" "Thomas, let me explain something to you. My parents have put $60,000 into this house. 60,000. Your contribution, while appreciated, is not the deciding factor in whether this purchase happens." I did the math quickly. If Richard and Eleanor had put up 60,000 and I was offering 43,000, that was over $100,000 total. Where was the rest coming from? "What about the mortgage? How much are you borrowing?" "That's not your concern. If I'm putting money into this house, it absolutely is my concern." A long pause. "Then fine. We're borrowing 180,000. Are you satisfied?" 180,000 plus 60,000 plus 43,000. That was $283,000 for a house listed at 280,000. They were borrowing more than the house was worth. "Stephanie, why are you borrowing so much? Where's the extra money going?" "Renovations, furniture, closing costs. Things that adults understand when they buy a house." "Adults," I repeated. "Right? Thomas, I'm going to be very clear with you. We don't need your money. We want your money because we want you to feel included. But if you're going to make demands and create drama, we'll just do this ourselves." "With what? If your parents have only put up 60,000 and you're borrowing 180, where's the down payment coming from?" Another pause, longer this time. "We have other resources." "What other resources?" "That's not your business. But taking my $43,000 is my business. If you choose to give it as a gift to your family, without strings attached." I closed my eyes and tried to count to 10. Made it to 3. "Stephanie, let me ask you something. If the situation were reversed, if Patrick and I had money and your parents wanted to contribute to a house purchase, would you expect your parents to hand over their life savings with no protection?" "That's different." "How is it different?" "Because my parents would understand their place in the arrangement." Their place. The same phrase Richard had used. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about money or houses or legal documents. This was about who belonged where in the social hierarchy that Stephanie and her family had constructed. And what place is that? Supportive, grateful, respectful of the fact that this is our decision to make. "Grateful," I repeated. "I should be grateful for the opportunity to give you my life savings. You should be grateful that we're willing to accept it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a 3-alarm fire. I could hear my own breathing, loud in the sudden silence. "Stephanie," I said very quietly, "I want you to repeat what you just said. I said you should be grateful that we're willing to accept your contribution. And why should I be grateful for that? Because frankly, Thomas, this is a step up for Patrick. This house, this neighborhood, the social connections that come with it, these are opportunities for advancement. Your money helps make that possible, but it doesn't make you an equal partner in the process. Why not? Because you don't bring anything else to the table." The words hit like a physical blow. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, staring at the phone like it had turned into a snake. "I don't bring anything else to the table," I repeated. "I'm not trying to be cruel, Thomas. I'm trying to be realistic. My parents bring financial resources, social connections, professional expertise. You bring money from a disability settlement. That's not the same thing." "I see. Do you? Because I'm not sure you understand how these relationships work. This isn't about charity or pity. It's about mutual benefit. My family benefits from having Patrick in their social circle. Patrick benefits from the connections and opportunities that come with that. You benefit from seeing your son succeed. And what does Patrick benefit from having me in his life? Emotional support, family history, the satisfaction of taking care of his father as he ages. Taking care of his father. Like I was already a burden instead of a man who'd spent 32 years risking his life to keep other people safe. "Stephanie, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Go ahead. Do you love my son?" A pause. "Of course I love Patrick. Do you respect him?" "What kind of question is that? Do you respect him? Do you respect the man his mother and I raised him to be? Patrick is a good man. He's going to be very successful." "That's not what I asked." Another pause, longer this time. "Thomas, I think this conversation has gone far enough. If you want to contribute to the house, the offer stands as presented. If not, we'll manage without you. And if I want to be treated as an equal partner in an investment that represents my entire life savings, then you don't understand how these things work." The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the phone, replaying the conversation in my head. Stephanie had just told me that my money was welcome, but my person was not. That Patrick's success required distancing himself from the working-class background that had shaped him. That I should be grateful for the opportunity to pay for my own exclusion from my son's life. I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue when Stephanie made comments about my clothes, my truck, my accent. All the times I'd pretended not to notice when she corrected my grammar or changed the subject when I tried to tell stories about my work. All the times I told myself that this was just how educated people behaved, and I needed to try harder to fit in. I'd been trying to fit into their world instead of demanding that they show respect for mine. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the front window, I could see Patrick standing on my porch, his shoulders slumped like he was carrying something heavy. I opened the door and stepped back to let him in. He walked to the living room and sat down without invitation, his head in his hands. "Dad, we need to figure this out." "I'm listening." "Stephanie's parents are threatening to pull their money if you insist on being on the deed. They're saying it's too complicated, too risky." "Too risky how?" "They're worried about liability issues. What happens if you get sued or if something happens to you and Mom? They don't want their investment tied up in legal complications." I sat down across from my son, studying his face. "Patrick, do you believe that?" "I don't know what to believe anymore. Everyone's angry. Everyone has different lawyers saying different things. I just want to buy a house for my family." "What do you want, son?" "Not what Stephanie wants, not what her parents want." "What do you want?" Patrick looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. "I want my family to be happy. All of my family. That includes me and your mother." "Yes." "Then you need to decide whether you're willing to stand up for us." Patrick was quiet for a long time. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, and I could hear Diane's car pulling into the driveway. "What if I can't?" he asked finally. "Can't what?" "What if I can't stand up to them?" What if they're right and I need their connections more than I need your money? The question hit harder than I'd expected. Not because I was angry, but because I was proud. It was the first honest thing Patrick had said in months. Then you'll have made your choice, I said. And I'll have made mine. Which is what? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cashier's check one more time. But instead of offering it to Patrick, I tore it in half. Which is that some things can't be bought. Patrick stared at the torn pieces of paper like I'd just set fire to his future. Dad, what did you do? I protected myself from people who think my money is more valuable than my dignity. But the house will still be there tomorrow. The question is whether you'll find another way to buy it, or whether you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you gave up to get it. Patrick left that evening without another word. Diane found me in the kitchen an hour later, sitting at the table with the pieces of the check spread out in front of me. How do you feel? She asked. Lighter, I said, and meant it. The next morning, I called the bank and had them issue a stop payment on the original check, just to be safe. Then I called Jim Morrison and asked him to draft a letter explaining exactly what had happened and why I'd withdrawn my offer. You want this for your records, or are you planning to send it to someone? I'm planning to send it to Patrick, and to Stephanie, and to her parents. I want everyone to understand exactly why this deal fell apart. Tommy, you sure about this? Once you put this in writing, there's no going back. Jim, I've been a firefighter for 32 years. I know the difference between a situation you can save and one you need to evacuate from. The letter was 3 pages long and laid out every detail of what had been proposed, what I'd requested, and how those requests had been rejected. It wasn't angry or vindictive. It was just factual. A clear record of how a family had chosen money over integrity. I mailed copies to everyone involved and then sat back to wait. The phone started ringing 2 hours after the letters were delivered. The first call was from Eleanor, Stephanie's mother. Her voice dripped with the kind of outraged dignity that only comes from being challenged by someone you consider beneath you. Thomas, I just received your letter. This is completely inappropriate. Which part? All of it. You've mischaracterized our family's intentions and made serious accusations about our business practices. Such as suggesting that we were trying to defraud you. We offered you exactly what we offered. The opportunity to contribute to your son's future. Without any legal protection for my contribution. Without unnecessary complications, yes. Eleanor, let me ask you something. If someone offered to take $60,000 from you with no legal protection, no written agreement, no guarantee of return, would you consider that a good deal? That's different. We're family. So am I. But Richard and I bring more than just money to this arrangement. Such as experience, connections, social standing. And what do I bring? A pause. Well, you bring your love for Patrick, of course. And $43,000. Yes. But my love for Patrick doesn't earn me a place on the deed. Thomas, you're deliberately misunderstanding the situation. Am I? Because it seems pretty clear to me. You want my money but not my participation. You want my financial contribution but not my family input. You want me to pay for a house I'll never have any legal claim to. That's a very cynical way to look at it. It's an accurate way to look at it. Eleanor's voice grew colder. Thomas, I think you need to consider the consequences of this decision. Patrick and Stephanie are very disappointed. You're jeopardizing your relationship with your grandchildren over money. I'm protecting my relationship with my grandchildren by refusing to be treated like a second-class family member. No one has treated you like a second-class family member. Eleanor, your daughter told me I should be grateful that you were willing to accept my money. She told me I don't bring anything else to the table. She told me that my place in this family is to provide emotional support and accept whatever scraps of respect you decide to throw my way. Silence. She said those things? Word for word. Well, I'm sure she didn't mean. She meant every word. And you know what? I believe her. Because that's exactly how your family has treated me since the day Patrick married her. Thomas, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Goodbye, Eleanor. I hung up and unplugged the phone. The next few weeks passed quietly. Patrick didn't call. Stephanie didn't call. I went about my routine of physical therapy, grocery shopping, and home maintenance, but everything felt different. Cleaner. Somehow, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath. Diane worried about the grandchildren, about missing birthdays and holidays. But she never suggested I'd made the wrong choice. Maybe they'll come around, she said one evening as we watched the news together. Maybe, I agreed, and maybe they won't. But at least we'll know where we stand. 3 months later, I ran into Patrick at the hardware store. He looked tired, older somehow, like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. Dad. Patrick. We stood in the paint aisle, surrounded by color samples and brushes, both of us pretending to study the different shades of white. How are you doing? He asked finally. I'm good. You? We bought the house. Good for you. Stephanie's parents covered the down payment. I figured they would. Patrick picked up a paint chip and turned it over in his hands. Dad, I need to tell you something. I'm listening. The mortgage payments are killing us. Even with Stephanie's parents helping, we're barely making it. I kept my face neutral. That's tough. And Stephanie, she's not happy. She says the house doesn't feel like home. Too much pressure. Too many expectations from her parents about how we should live. Sounds complicated. Patrick looked at me directly for the first time. I think I made a mistake. Which mistake? All of it. The house, the way I handled things with you, letting other people make decisions about my family. I put down the paintbrush I'd been examining. Patrick, you're a grown man. You made your choices. I know, but I'm wondering if it's too late to make different ones. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and felt my blood pressure spike. The message was from Stephanie. Thomas, we need your help. Please call. I showed the text to Patrick. His face went pale. Dad, there's something else I need to tell you. Something about Stephanie's father. That evening, Patrick sat in my living room and told me a story that made my $43,000 problem seem small by comparison. It turned out that Richard Whitmore's law practice specialized in what he called creative real estate solutions. What that meant, according to Patrick, was helping wealthy clients hide assets, avoid taxes, and manipulate property records for personal gain. He's been using our house as part of some larger scheme, Patrick explained. Something about creating artificial losses for tax purposes. I don't understand all of it, but I know it's not legal. How do you know this? Stephanie found documents in his office. Blueprints, financial records, correspondence with other clients. She confronted him about it, and he told her to mind her own business. What kind of documents? Patrick pulled out a manila folder and spread papers across my coffee table. Property deeds, bank statements, correspondence between Richard and several other lawyers. As I read through them, a picture emerged of systematic fraud involving dozens of properties across the state. Patrick, this is serious. How long has this been going on? Years, apparently. And Dad, our house is just one piece of it. He's been using the co-ownership arrangement to claim depreciation losses that don't actually exist. I studied the documents more carefully. Richard had set up a complex web of shell companies and false partnerships, all designed to generate tax write-offs while enriching himself and his clients. My son's house was being used as a front for tax fraud. What does Stephanie want to do about this? She's terrified. If this comes out, her father could go to prison. Her whole family could lose everything. And what do you want to do? Patrick was quiet for a long moment. I want to do the right thing, but I don't know what that is anymore. I gathered up the documents and handed them back to Patrick. Son, I can't make this decision for you, but I can tell you that pretending this isn't happening won't make it go away. What would you do? I'd probably start by talking to someone who knows more about this stuff than I do. The next morning, Patrick and I sat in Jim Morrison's office while Jim reviewed the documents Patrick had brought. Jim's expression grew darker with each page he turned. Jesus Christ, Patrick. Your father-in-law is running a massive tax fraud operation. How massive? I asked. Based on what I'm seeing here, probably millions of dollars in false deductions over the past 5 years. The IRS would be very interested in this information. Patrick shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What happens if we report it? Richard goes to prison. Probably for a long time. Everyone who participated in the scheme gets investigated. Some of them probably go to prison too. What about innocent family members? Patrick asked. Depends on how innocent they really are. If Stephanie knew about this and didn't report it, she could be considered an accessory. Same goes for her mother. I watched my son's face as the implications sank in. Patrick, did Stephanie know about this when they were setting up the house purchase? I don't think so. At least not the details. But she knew her father was doing something questionable with real estate transactions. Jim leaned back in his chair. Patrick, let me ask you something. Are you prepared to lose your house over this? What do you mean? I mean, if we report this to the authorities, your house is going to be tied up in the investigation. Worst case scenario, it gets seized as part of the fraud proceeds. Best case scenario, you're looking at years of legal complications. Patrick rubbed his face with his hands. What other options do we have? You could walk away, sell the house, pay back the mortgage, try to extract yourselves from the situation before it explodes. And if we do that, you lose whatever equity you've built up, you probably take a financial hit, but you avoid criminal liability. I'd been listening to this conversation with growing clarity about what needed to happen. Not just for Patrick and Stephanie, but for all the other families who might be getting victimized by Richard's schemes. Jim, what if someone were to provide additional evidence about Richard's activities? Say, someone who had been approached to participate in questionable financial arrangements. Jim looked at me sharply. You mean someone like you? Hypothetically. Hypothetically, that could be very valuable to investigators. Especially if that someone had documentation of conversations, meetings, attempts to involve them in the scheme. I thought about my meeting with Richard, about his condescending explanations of how sophisticated people handled these arrangements, about his insistence that family relationships shouldn't be governed by legal contracts while he was simultaneously using legal contracts to defraud the government. Patrick, I want you to think about something. Your father-in-law didn't just try to cheat me out of my money. He tried to use me as an unwitting participant in a criminal enterprise. What do you mean? He wanted my $43,000 to help legitimize his fraud scheme. If I'd gone along with his arrangement, I would have been helping him steal from taxpayers. Patrick stared at me. You think that's why he structured it the way he did? I think Richard Whitmore is a very smart man who's been running a very sophisticated con game. And I think he picked the wrong family to mess with. That afternoon, I called the IRS fraud hotline. The conversation lasted 2 hours. I told them about Richard's attempts to involve me in his real estate arrangements, about the documents Patrick had found, about the suspicious financial structures surrounding my son's house purchase. 3 days later, 2 federal agents knocked on Patrick's door. The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. Richard's law office was raided, his computers seized, his bank accounts frozen. Within a week, the local news was running stories about prominent attorney under federal investigation for tax fraud. Stephanie had a complete breakdown. She called me crying, begging me to somehow make it stop, promising that her family would do anything to make things right. Thomas, please. I know we treated you badly, but this is destroying everything. My father could go to prison. My mother could lose the house. Patrick could lose his job if this scandal gets out. Stephanie, I didn't create this situation. Your father did. But you reported it. You could have just walked away and let him keep stealing from taxpayers? Let him keep using other families the way he tried to use mine. It's not that simple. Actually, it is exactly that simple. Your father is a criminal. Criminals belong in prison. The investigation revealed that Richard's fraud scheme had cost taxpayers over $3 million in false deductions. He'd been running it for 8 years, using his position as a respected attorney to lend credibility to increasingly brazen financial manipulations. More than 30 families had been involved, most of them unknowingly. Richard had convinced clients that his creative arrangements were perfectly legal, aggressive but legitimate tax planning strategies. Patrick and Stephanie's house was indeed seized as part of the investigation, along with 6 other properties that had been used in the scheme. They had 30 days to vacate. "Where will we go?" Stephanie asked during one particularly tearful phone call. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I know where you won't be going." "Where's that?" "Prison. Unlike your father." Richard Whitmore was indicted on 14 counts of tax fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He plea bargained down to 7 years in federal prison in exchange for cooperating with the investigation into his co-conspirators. Eleanor lost the family home and moved into a small apartment across town. The law practice collapsed, taking the family's social standing with it. Stephanie and Patrick divorced 6 months later. The financial stress, the legal complications, and the complete destruction of Stephanie's family's reputation proved too much for their marriage to survive. Patrick moved back in with Diane and me temporarily while he figured out his next steps. It was awkward at first, 3 adults trying to navigate a living situation that none of us had planned for. But slowly, something unexpected happened. We started talking again. Really talking, not the careful, superficial conversations we'd been having for years. Patrick told me about the pressure he'd felt to live up to Stephanie's family's expectations, about how exhausting it had been to pretend to be someone he wasn't. "I thought I needed their approval to be successful," he said one evening as we sat on the back porch. "I thought being working class was something I needed to overcome. And now I think being working class taught me more about integrity than 4 years of college and 10 years of marriage to a lawyer's daughter." Diane brought us coffee and sat down in her lawn chair. "So what happens next?" Patrick was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that. My teaching job is secure, thank God. The kids don't care about their teachers' family scandals. And I've been looking at smaller houses, places I can actually afford on my salary." "Sounds reasonable," I said. "There's something else, though. Something I've been wanting to ask you." "What's that?" Patrick reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've been working with a financial planner, trying to figure out how to rebuild after all this. She suggested that having a cosigner might help me get better mortgage terms." He handed me the paper. It was a pre-approval letter from a bank, showing that Patrick qualified for a modest mortgage with a cosigner. "I know I have no right to ask this after everything that happened, but I was wondering if you'd consider being my cosigner. Not giving me money, just helping me qualify for a loan I can actually handle." I read through the paperwork carefully. The numbers were reasonable, the terms were straightforward, and most importantly, Patrick would be the sole owner of whatever property he purchased. "What about a down payment?" "I've got some savings. Not much, but enough for a small place." I folded the paper and handed it back to him. "Patrick, I appreciate you asking, but I need to know something first." "What's that?" "I need to know that you've learned something from all this, that you understand why I couldn't go along with your in-laws' arrangement." Patrick looked me in the eye. "Dad, I understand that you were trying to protect yourself from people who saw you as a means to an end. I understand that respect isn't something you can buy or borrow. And I understand that I chose the wrong side when I should have been defending my family. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let them treat you like you were beneath them. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you when it mattered. I'm sorry I almost traded my integrity for their approval." I reached over and squeezed my son's shoulder. "Apology accepted. Does that mean you'll co-sign?" "It means I'll think about it." That night, Diane and I talked it over. "He's learned his lesson," she said. "And he's asking for help, not a handout." "I know, but I'm scared of getting burned again. Tommy, he's our son. Sometimes you have to take risks for family. Even after what happened? Especially after what happened. He made mistakes, but he's trying to make them right." I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called Patrick into the kitchen and sat him down at the table. "I'll co-sign on one condition." "What's that?" "We do this through Jim Morrison. Everything documented, everything legal, everything transparent. If I'm putting my credit on the line, I want protection." "Absolutely. And one more thing." "Yeah. Next time someone tries to make you ashamed of where you come from, You tell them to go to hell. Patrick smiled for the first time in months. Yes, sir. 6 months later, Patrick bought a small 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood not far from where Diane and I lived. It wasn't fancy, but it was his, and he could afford it on his teacher's salary. The closing was on a Friday afternoon. Jim Morrison handled the paperwork, making sure every detail was properly documented and legally sound. When it was over, Patrick handed me a set of keys. What are these for? Emergency key, in case you ever need anything or want to stop by unannounced. I laughed. Are you sure? What if I disrupt your peace? Dad, you are my peace. That weekend, we had a housewarming party. Nothing fancy, just family and a few of Patrick's teaching colleagues. Diane made her famous potato salad. I grilled burgers on Patrick's new back deck, and we celebrated the simple pleasure of a home bought honestly with money earned through honest work. As the evening wound down and the last guests were leaving, Patrick pulled me aside. Dad, I know I can never really make up for what happened, but I want you to know that I'm grateful. For what? For not giving up on me. For teaching me that some things are more important than money or status or other people's approval. I looked around Patrick's modest living room, at the furniture he'd bought at thrift stores and the family photos arranged on shelves he'd built himself. It wasn't the grand colonial that Stephanie's family had envisioned, but it was honest. It was real. It was his. You know what, son? I think this house is perfect. Really? Really? It's a house bought by a man who knows who he is and isn't ashamed of it. That's the best kind of house there is. A year later, I got a call from Jim Morrison. Tommy, you might be interested to know that Richard Whitmore was sentenced today. 7 years, just like his plea agreement specified. How do you feel about that? Like justice was served. Not just for you, but for all the families he cheated. I thought about Richard sitting in his expensive office, explaining to me how sophisticated people handled these arrangements. I wondered if federal prison would teach him anything about the value of honest work and simple integrity. Probably not. But that wasn't my problem anymore. These days, Patrick and I have dinner together every Sunday. Sometimes at his house, sometimes at ours. We talk about his students, about home improvement projects, about the grandchildren's latest adventures. Stephanie moved to another state after the divorce. She sends Christmas cards but doesn't call. Patrick says she's working for a nonprofit now, something about helping low-income families with legal issues. Maybe she learned something from all this too. Maybe not. I still have most of that $43,000, minus the legal fees and the money I spent helping Patrick with his new house. Diane and I used some of it to take a cruise to Alaska, something we'd always talked about but never thought we could afford. On the ship, surrounded by working people from all over the country who'd saved their money for this one special trip, I realized something important. Richard Whitmore and his family had tried to convince me that my money was more valuable than my dignity. They were wrong about that. But more importantly, they tried to convince my son that his background was something to be ashamed of. They were wrong about that too. Patrick McKenna is a good man who treats people with respect regardless of how much money they have. He works hard, pays his bills, and takes care of his family. He learned those values from his mother and me, and no amount of social climbing or status seeking could improve on that foundation. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's just living well and letting them destroy themselves. Richard Whitmore thought he was smarter than a working-class firefighter from Boston. He thought he could manipulate me into participating in his criminal enterprise. He thought wrong. In the end, he lost everything: his career, his freedom, his family's respect, and his place in the community he'd spent decades building. I kept everything that really mattered: my integrity, my family, and my self-respect. That seems like a fair trade to me. If you liked this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let others define your worth.